Welcome friends, in part 5 of video. In this video you will see 8 real interview questions on conflict management and handling stakeholders. Under series of top 100 senior Agile project manager Scrum Master questions that might be asked in an interview to test various aspects of Agile project management skills, with tips and an answer for each of them. Please check out the link in description for part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. If you are visiting our channel Careers Talk first time, please make sure you click the subscribe button. At the end of video I am sure you will learn something new. Please hit like button. Your one like is big motivation for me. So friends, let's start with 100 senior Agile project manager questions. 1. How do you handle office politics? When job interviewers ask this question, they are trying to assess your people skills. No one wants an employee who doesn't fit in with their colleagues, clients or blends into the company culture. Tip number 1, reflect in your answers that you are not generally an easily irritated person, because that's one of the things that the interviewers are trying to gauge. Tip number 2, demonstrate that when a situation of annoyance arises, you communicate and handle it with grace. Sample answer. I try to stay as far away from office politics as I can because I find that it disturbs my performance. Personally, I like people and can pretty much work with anyone. Plus, I do my best to follow directions and meet what is expected of me in the workplace. I find that the best course of action is to stay out of these internal battles. It's rare, but I get very annoyed when one person wants to take credit for something a group effort. I think credit should be given where it's due. That's how teams work. It's not just unfair to people, but also impacts the team efforts as well. I believe in effective delegation. I assign clear roles to each member, with guidelines to ensure no one steps beyond their remit. Hence, the issue of someone taking undue credit does not arise on my watch. 2. Tell me about a time when you had 2 key stakeholders with opposing views. How did you manage that? This is a very important question, and often requires a detailed answer with a real-life situation. This helps the employer determine how flexible, accommodating and influential your personality is and what you do when a conflict arises. Tip number 1, always answer in a manner that shows that you seek to understand the people, listen to them and then come to a conclusion. Tip number 2, keep it positive and highlight your persuasive tactics. Sample answer. At my last job, there was a big debate among 2 of our executives on selecting one of the 2 companies who wanted to work with us. One of the companies was more well-known and budget-friendly, while the other was less known, costlier, but it would get our job done in the long run. One of the executives wanted our company to work with the famous one, and the other wanted to work with the less-known company. Things got heated pretty quick, and I had to step in, call in a lunch break. When I saw that both the parties had calmed down over a cup of coffee, I brought the situation up again and had both the executives make their arguments one by one, listed down both the benefits on a whiteboard across from each other, and let them decide. They ended up going with the less-known company, just by the way, and from what I hear it turned out very well for them. 3. How do you deal with rude clients? Your interviewer wants to know and test your reasoning abilities, problem-solving skills, and how effectively you make decisions on the spot. This is also a test of your people skills. Tip number 1, make sure that the answer that you provide is well thought and well constructed. Tip number 2, avoid using cynical or indifferent words, or a harsh language. Tip number 3, try to showcase your leadership, communication, and attentiveness to the customer as much as possible. Tip number 4, don't just say any vague sentences, try to be precise and give real-life examples. Sample answer. I think complaints are unavoidable, and many people don't really handle them well. So when I see that happening, I usually let the client have their say, and it's only when they stop that I gently let them know the situation. I believe clients should be treated with respect and communicated with, informed to their satisfaction, because both of us want the same thing. For example, if a client comes to us and wants to complain about a delay in delivery of the equipment they ordered, I apologize and tell them why we can't take their purchase back. Then I gently guide them towards alternatives. Of course, I want to make sure that they are heard and feel understood, which usually calms people down. I genuinely believe that, because the clients are what keeps us up and running, A dissatisfied customer is a bad reflection of the company. I make sure to hear them out, pay close attention to their concerns, and address them keeping in mind the policies of our company. 4. Have you ever had a conflict with your boss? How was it resolved? The interviewer is trying to assess your conflict management skills and their compatibility with your interaction with authority figures. They want to know if you respect your supervisors, even when you happen to disagree with them. Tip number 1, keep track of incidents of conflict at your workplace that you were involved in, and how you handled them. Tip number 2, don't say it out loud if you disliked your previous boss, no matter what. Tip number 3, try to offer up a real-life example, because experienced interviewers can often look through made-up stories. Tip number 4, talk a little about the conflict, but focus primarily on the resolution and the role you played in bringing it about. Tip number 5, stay humble and considerate. Sample answer. I've been very lucky that I have had excellent, talented employees so far in my career, and I have a lot of respect for them. Of course, conflicts and disagreements arise, but usually, I get along quite well with managers because I'm a very hard worker. I did have a rocky start in the beginning of my career with one of my managers, but it was primarily because I had different expectations than he had. I think keeping a steady communication channel open is necessary, and I would try and chat up every other day with him to get an idea of our goals. I ended up finding a middle ground, and it all worked out. In fact, that was the longest I had worked at a company. 5. How are you when you're working under pressure? The interviewer wants an elaborate incident of a pressure-inducing situation, how it affected you and how you managed to handle it. There are times that pressure actually makes things more productive for some employees, and that's another thing that they might want to know. Tip number 1, avoid mentioning an incident when the stress or pressure was self-induced. For example, don't narrate a story about how you were stressed because you procrastinated, rather when you were given many tasks and you finished them on time. Tip number 2, don't talk about how you were feeling, just what you did to combat that feeling. Tip number 3, every job has a certain situation of stress that will arise occasionally. Make sure you don't say that such incidents bother you. Tip number 4, if stress can be a motivator and cause you to be creative, definitely throw that in. Sample answer. I think workplace pressure is inevitable, and it can get to everyone. But over the years, I figured out how to manage it better. I find that I actually work better under pressure, like when there are a lot of assignments to do and the deadline is soon. With the end goal in near sight, I find that I stay motivated and productive. Of course, all of us do grumble under stressful situations, and I'm no exception, but I usually manage to salvage things because I'm pretty good at multitasking and time management. For example, once I had 4 big projects due in the same week. I created a schedule, allotted a time for each and every task, and managed to stick to it. 6. How will you gain and keep the support of your project sponsors? Your interviewer is looking for essentially 2 things: how you define project sponsors and how you elicit and retain information from them as a project leader. Some people consider project sponsors to be the people who review the project, while others consider them the people who hold the budget. Either way, project managers are responsible for upholding these relationships and effectively communicating the value of the project to these people so that there is continual support. Tip number 1, you can use this question to talk about your supply chain management skills, people and project management skills, negotiation skills, and your ability to responsibly deliver the financials and administrations of a project to achieve project goals. Tip number 2, highlight your strong negotiation skills and your history of building strong relationships with colleagues and project sponsors. Sample answer. The key to keeping project sponsors is very simple: do the project on time, within the budget, and satisfy the customers. If the project goes with a minimum amount of glitches, you will inevitably have the support of project sponsors. I work very hard to keep the projects I'm involved in on track. I informally interfere with customers and sponsors. If I sense things are going south, I conduct regular formal meetings with all team members to keep track of and resolve arising issues. I am wholeheartedly open to solution suggestions. I keep the customers informed at every step of the way. I continuously communicate with the higher-ups of the project, and I take all concerns and requests very seriously. This obviously requires a lot of communication and negotiation, but it keeps the project running smooth, and that's all that the sponsors eventually care for. 7. What is a stakeholder? There are many stakeholders in the project, including the project leader, testers, customers, resource managers, senior management, project team members, consultants, and even contractors and subcontractors. With this question, the interviewer wants to know what your definition of a stakeholder is, and which of them do you consider most important. Your relationships, negotiation, and communication levels all matter in a project, particularly with stakeholders. Tip number 1, focus on all groups of stakeholders, rather than on one. Tip number 2, every group has a different set of importance, priorities, urgencies, proximities, and power. Talk about the stakeholder circle. Sample answer: the person, entity, or organization which is directly affected by a project is the stakeholder. Such an effect may be positive or negative, but the party involved has influence over the project, which is why it is important to involve them and keep them updated through all the phases of a project: planning, execution, and closing.